The words hit harder than any physical blow. "Captain Rodriguez, you'll never make an admiral. Not in my Navy." General Harrison's voice carried across the Pentagon briefing room with the weight of absolute certainty. Captain Isabella Rodriguez maintained her composure, but something flickered behind her dark eyes. Not defeat, but determination forged in steel. "Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." 3 months later, when the greatest maritime crisis in decades threatened to destabilize the entire Pacific region, that same general would watch in stunned silence as the Secretary of Defense personally called Captain Rodriguez to take command of the largest naval operation in modern history. The morning fog clung to San Diego Harbor like a gray shroud as Captain Isabella Rodriguez walked across the pier toward the USS Constellation. Her new assignment as Deputy Operations Commander for the Pacific Fleet, the massive aircraft carrier loomed before her, a floating city of steel and purpose that represented everything she had worked toward in her 18-year naval career. Isabella's reflection wavered in the harbor's dark water as she paused momentarily on the pier. At 39, she carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every stripe through merit and determination. Her grandmother's words echoed in her memory. "Mia, they will always try to make you smaller. Your job is to prove them wrong through excellence, not anger." The Constellation bustled with pre-deployment activity. Sailors moved with practiced efficiency across the massive deck, preparing for what would become the most significant Pacific exercises in 5 years. Isabella checked her watch. 0630 hours. She was early as always, a habit that had served her well throughout her career, but somehow never seemed to impress the right people at the right moments. As she climbed the steep gangway, Isabella's mind was already focused on the challenges ahead. The Pacific Fleet faced increasing tensions with multiple foreign powers, complex territorial disputes, and the ever-present need to maintain strategic balance in the world's largest ocean. Her expertise in multi-theater operations and advanced naval strategy had earned her this position, though she knew some viewed her appointment through a different lens entirely. The officer of the deck saluted as she boarded. "Captain Rodriguez, welcome aboard the Constellation. Admiral Mitchell is expecting you at Flag Bridge at 0700. Isabella returned the salute crisply. "Thank you, Lieutenant. I'll find my way." She made her way through the carrier's maze of corridors, noting the controlled chaos of a ship preparing for deployment. The Constellation would serve as the command vessel for Exercise Pacific Guardian, a massive joint operation involving 12 allied nations and over 60 ships. Isabella had spent months developing the operational framework for the exercise, creating contingency plans for scenarios that ranged from humanitarian assistance to potential military conflicts. The Flag Bridge occupied the highest level of the carrier's superstructure, offering a commanding view of the harbor and surrounding naval facilities. Floor-to-ceiling windows provided panoramic visibility, while banks of sophisticated displays showed real-time data from across the Pacific Fleet. Admiral Patricia Mitchell stood studying a digital map projection when Isabella entered. Admiral Mitchell was a legend in naval circles, the first woman to command a carrier strike group and now the Pacific Fleet's deputy commander. Her silver hair was pulled back in a regulation bun, and her blue eyes held the sharp intelligence that had earned her 3 stars and the respect of allies and adversaries alike. "Captain Rodriguez." Admiral Mitchell turned with a slight smile. "Right on time. I've been looking forward to working with you on Pacific Guardian." "Thank you, Admiral. I'm honored to be part of the operation." Mitchell gestured toward the map display showing the vast expanse of the Pacific Ocean, dotted with icons representing naval assets from multiple nations. "Your operational plans for the exercise are impressive, particularly your analysis of multi-vector threat scenarios." Most officers think in terms of single-axis challenges. Isabella studied the display, noting the complex positioning of friendly and simulated enemy forces. The Pacific is too vast and strategically important for simple solutions, Admiral. Any major conflict would involve multiple theaters, different types of warfare, and unprecedented coordination challenges. Exactly, Mitchell's approval was evident. Which is why I specifically requested you for this assignment. Your background in advanced strategic planning and your experience coordinating international naval operations make you uniquely qualified for what we're attempting here. The compliment meant more than Isabella cared to admit. Admiral Mitchell's respect was hard-earned and rarely given lightly. But Isabella also knew that not everyone shared the Admiral's perspective on her qualifications, as if summoned by her thoughts. The bridge communications system crackled to life. Flag bridge, this is communications. General Harrison is requesting a video conference with Admiral Mitchell and Captain Rodriguez at 0730. Isabella's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. General Marcus Harrison, chairman of the Joint Chiefs Strategic Planning Committee, had made his opinions about her quite clear during their previous interactions in Washington. His opposition to her promotion to captain had been barely counseled, and his recent comments about women in senior command positions had become the subject of quiet discussions throughout the Navy. Admiral Mitchell noticed her reaction. Captain, General Harrison can be challenging, but his strategic mind is sharp, even if his perspectives on personnel can be outdated. I understand, Admiral. I'll focus on the operational requirements. The video conference began precisely at 0730. General Harrison's weathered face filled the main screen, his expression stern and businesslike. Behind him, Isabella could see the familiar wood-paneled walls of his Pentagon office, decorated with photographs spanning 4 decades of military service. Admiral Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez. Harrison's greeting was perfunctory. I've been reviewing the Pacific Guardian exercise parameters. Some concerns have been raised about the complexity of the operational structure. Admiral Mitchell leaned forward slightly. What specific concerns, General? The multi-theater coordination requirements seem unnecessarily complicated. Traditional Pacific exercises have focused on single-scenario training. This approach introduces variables that could compromise exercise effectiveness. Isabella recognized the criticism for what it was: an indirect attack on her planning methodology. She had designed the Pacific Guardian to test the fleet's ability to handle multiple simultaneous challenges, reflecting the reality of modern Pacific security concerns, rather than outdated single-threat models. General Harrison, Isabella interjected. Respectfully, the exercise complexity reflects actual strategic challenges we face in the Pacific. Recent intelligence suggests that any major conflict would involve coordinated threats across multiple domains: surface, subsurface, air, space, and cyber. Training for single scenarios leaves us unprepared for realistic operational environments. Harrison's expression darkened. Captain Rodriguez, theoretical complexity and practical execution are different matters. Your academic approach to strategy might work in war colleges, but real naval operations require proven methodologies. The word academic carried a particular sting, implying that her expertise was purely theoretical rather than operational. Isabella had commanded ships in 3 different conflicts and led successful missions in some of the world's most dangerous waters, but Harrison seemed determined to view her contributions through a different lens. Admiral Mitchell intervened smoothly. General, Captain Rodriguez's operational experience speaks for itself. Her command of the Vanguard during the Strait of Malacca crisis demonstrated exactly the kind of multi-domain thinking we need for the Pacific Guardian. That was a small-scale operation, Harrison dismissed. Fleet-level command requires different capabilities entirely. Captain Rodriguez, while undoubtedly competent at her current level, lacks the strategic perspective necessary for large-scale Pacific operations. The insult was delivered with bureaucratic precision, designed to wound without crossing into actionable territory. Isabella felt her grandmother's voice again. Dignity under pressure, Mia. Let your work speak louder than their words. I understand your concerns, General, Isabella replied evenly. Perhaps the exercise results will provide the data needed to evaluate the effectiveness of different operational approaches. Harrison's slight smile was condescending. Captain, naval strategy isn't an experiment. It's a profession built on proven principles and experienced leadership. He paused, his next words carrying the weight of pronouncement. You have potential, but you'll never make Admiral think like this. The Navy needs leaders who understand tradition and tested methods, not theoretical innovations. The silence that followed was deafening. Admiral Mitchell's face remained neutral, but Isabella could see the tension in her posture. Such direct dismissal of a captain's potential for advancement was highly irregular and bordered on unprofessional. General, Admiral Mitchell said carefully, Captain Rodriguez's promotion trajectory will be determined by her performance and the Navy's needs, not by adherence to any particular strategic philosophy. Of course, Harrison replied, though his tone suggested he considered the matter settled. I trust the exercise will proceed according to established protocols. Admiral Mitchell, I'll expect regular updates on operational progress. The connection ended abruptly, leaving the flag bridge in uncomfortable silence. Isabella stared at the now blank screen, processing what had just occurred. General Harrison hadn't just criticized her planning. He had publicly declared that her career would never advance beyond her current rank, essentially placing a ceiling on her aspirations based on his personal assessment. Admiral Mitchell turned to face her, concern evident in her expression. Captain, I want you to know that General Harrison's opinion doesn't reflect the Navy's view of your capabilities or potential. I appreciate that, Admiral. Isabella's voice remained steady, professional. My focus remains on ensuring Pacific Guardian achieves its operational objectives. Good. Mitchell studied her for a moment longer. Isabella, if I may speak freely. For a moment. You have something that very few officers possess, the ability to see the big picture while managing complex details. Don't let anyone convince you that capability is a limitation. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Isabella nodded, grateful for the support even as Harrison's words continued to echo. In her mind, thank you, Admiral. That means a great deal is coming from you. As Admiral Mitchell returned to her planning documents, Isabella moved to the windows overlooking the harbor. The morning fog was beginning to lift, revealing the impressive array of naval vessels preparing for departure. Destroyers, cruisers, and support ships formed the steel constellation around the mighty carrier, each one representing years of training, preparation, and taxpayer investment in national security. She thought about the path that had brought her to this moment. Growing up in Phoenix as the daughter of a Mexican-American teacher and an Irish-American mechanic, the military had seemed like an impossible dream. But her high school guidance counselor had seen something in her academic performance and suggested the Naval Academy. 4 years at Annapolis had transformed her from an uncertain teenager into a confident naval officer. Though the challenges of being one of only a handful of Hispanic women in her class had taught her early lessons about perseverance. Her first assignment aboard the destroyer Hamilton had been a trial by fire. As the junior officer responsible for communications and navigation, she had quickly learned that respect in the Navy was earned through competence under pressure. The senior chief who became her mentor, a gruff career sailor named Thompson, had taught her that the ship didn't care about your background, only about your ability to do the job when lives were on the line. Over the years, Isabella had commanded progressively larger vessels, and taken on increasingly complex assignments. Her expertise in multi-domain warfare had developed through real-world experience in hotspots around the globe. The Strait of Malacca crisis that Admiral Mitchell had mentioned involved coordinating response to simultaneous piracy threats, territorial disputes, and potential terrorist activities across a critical shipping lane. Isabella's innovative approach to the problem, treating it as a connected series of challenges rather than separate incidents, had resulted in the most successful counter-piracy operation in the region's history. But success, Isabella had learned, could be interpreted differently depending on who was doing the evaluating. Some saw her achievements as proof of exceptional capability. Others, like General Harrison, seemed to view them as dangerous departures from established doctrine. The irony wasn't lost on her. The same strategic thinking that made her effective in complex situations was being criticized as too innovative for traditional naval operations. She was being told simultaneously that she was too theoretical and too practical, too focused on details and too concerned with big-picture thinking. Knock on the flag bridge hatch interrupted her thoughts. A young ensign entered and saluted. "Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Mitchell." "The department heads are assembled for the Pacific Guardian final briefing." Isabella checked her watch. The morning had passed more quickly than she realized. In 30 minutes, she would be presenting the operational framework for the largest naval exercise in 5 years to senior officers from 12 different navies. The irony of the timing wasn't lost on her hours after being told she would never advance beyond captain. She was about to demonstrate the kind of strategic thinking that few officers at any rank could match. As she gathered her materials and prepared to leave the flag bridge, Isabella allowed herself one last look at the harbor. Somewhere out there in the vast Pacific Ocean, challenges were developing that would test everything the Navy thought it knew about modern warfare. When those challenges emerged, the question wouldn't be whether her strategies were too innovative or too complex. The question would be whether they worked, and Isabella Rodriguez intended to make sure they did. The main briefing theater aboard the USS Constellation filled rapidly as senior officers from 12 allied nations took their seats. Captain Isabella Rodriguez stood at the podium, her presentation materials arranged with military precision. The massive digital displays behind her showed the scope of Exercise Pacific Guardian, a complex web of naval assets, territorial boundaries, and strategic objectives spanning half the world's largest ocean. Admiral Mitchell entered with the international delegation, and Isabella noted the diverse array of uniforms representing navies from Australia, Japan, South Korea, India, Singapore, Thailand, the Philippines, New Zealand, Canada, the United Kingdom, and France. Each officer brought decades of experience and deeply held beliefs about naval strategy. Convincing this group to embrace her multi-theater approach would require more than theoretical explanations. It would demand demonstrable results. "Ladies and gentlemen," Admiral Mitchell began, "Exercise Pacific Guardian represents the most comprehensive multinational naval operation in this region's history. Captain Rodriguez will brief you on the operational framework and coordination protocols." Isabella activated the first display, showing the traditional Pacific exercise model used for the past 2 decades. Historically, Pacific naval exercises have focused on single-scenario training, submarine warfare, surface engagement, or air defense, each treated as isolated challenges with dedicated response protocols. She advanced to the next display, revealing a drastically different approach. Pacific Guardian introduces integrated threat modeling. Rather than training for individual scenarios, we'll simultaneously manage surface threats, submarine incursions, cyber warfare, aerial reconnaissance, humanitarian crises, and territorial disputes, all occurring within overlapping timeframes and geographical areas. Rear Admiral Tanaka from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force raised his hand. Captain Rodriguez, this approach seems to complicate what should be straightforward training objectives. How do we measure success when multiple variables interact unpredictably? It was exactly the question Isabella had expected, and precisely the mindset she needed to change. Admiral Tanaka, real conflicts don't follow exercise protocols. The South China Sea tensions, North Korean provocations, natural disasters, and cyber attacks don't wait for us to finish training for one scenario before presenting the next challenge. She clicked to a detailed timeline showing recent Pacific incidents. In the past 18 months alone, we've seen coordinated submarine infiltrations during humanitarian relief operations, cyber attacks targeting naval communications during territorial disputes, and surface vessels conducting aggressive maneuvers while aircraft violated national airspace. Each incident required multi-domain responses that our current training protocols don't adequately address. Captain Morrison from the Royal Australian Navy leaned forward. Assuming we accept the need for complex training, how do you prevent operational confusion when multiple scenarios compete for attention and resources? Isabella had spent months developing the answer to this exact question. Through adaptive command structures and distributed decision-making protocols. Rather than centralizing all decisions through a single command authority, Pacific Guardian establishes regional coordination nodes with autonomous response capabilities. She activated an animated display showing the command structure in action. Each coordination node handles specific geographical areas and threat types, but maintains constant communication with adjacent nodes. When scenarios overlap or escalate, the network automatically adjusts resource allocation and command authority to match the evolving situation. Admiral Chun from Singapore's Navy studied the display intently. This requires unprecedented coordination between different naval traditions and communication protocols. How do you ensure compatibility between our systems? Through standardized interface protocols we've developed specifically for this exercise, Isabella replied. Each nation retains its internal command structure and operational procedures, but interfaces with the coordination network through common communication standards. Think of it as a universal translator for naval operations. The room buzzed with quiet conversations as officers discussed the implications among themselves. Isabella recognized the mixture of skepticism and intrigue on their faces. What she was proposing represented a fundamental shift in how multinational naval operations would be conducted, not just for this exercise, but potentially for future real-world conflicts. Commander Williams from the Canadian Navy raised a concern that Isabella knew would resonate with traditionalists. Captain, this sounds impressive in theory, but naval warfare relies on proven tactics and clear command hierarchies. Aren't we risking confusion and delayed response times by introducing these complex coordination requirements? Isabella had anticipated this objection and prepared her most compelling counterargument. Commander, let me share some data from recent regional conflicts. She displayed classified intelligence that had been cleared for international sharing. Analysis of the Taiwan Strait incidents shows that traditional response models failed because multiple threat types emerged simultaneously. Surface vessels couldn't respond effectively to submarine threats, while also managing aerial reconnaissance and cyber intrusions. She advanced to the next slide, showing response timelines. Traditional sequential response protocols would have required 73 minutes to address all threat vectors. The coordinated approach we're testing reduces that to 18 minutes. Difference between successful defense and catastrophic failure. The numbers had their intended effect. Military officers understood that in modern warfare, minutes could determine the survival of entire fleets. 18 minutes versus 73 minutes wasn't just an improvement, it was the difference between victory and defeat. Admiral Petrov from the visiting Russian observer delegation spoke for the first time. Captain Rodriguez, assuming your coordination system functions as designed, How do you prevent information overload during actual crisis situations? Human decision makers have cognitive limitations. Isabella smiled slightly. The Russian Admiral had identified one of the most challenging aspects of her system design. Through artificial intelligence integration and predictive modeling, the coordination network doesn't just relay information, it analyzes patterns, predicts likely scenario developments, and presents decision makers with prioritized options rather than raw data streams. She demonstrated the system interface on the main display. Commanders receive situation summaries tailored to their specific responsibilities and decision authorities. The AI handles routine coordination tasks automatically, escalating only decisions that require human judgment or fall outside established parameters. Admiral Yamamoto from Japan studied the interface carefully. This level of automation introduces technological dependencies that could become vulnerabilities themselves. What happens when enemy cyber warfare targets your coordination system? The system is designed with distributed redundancy and manual fallback protocols, Isabella explained. If cyber attacks compromise the AI coordination, operations automatically revert to traditional command structures while maintaining the geographical node framework. We don't lose the improved organization, just the automated efficiency. As questions continued, Isabella found herself defending not just the technical aspects of her approach, but the fundamental philosophy behind it. Traditional naval thinking emphasized clear hierarchies, proven procedures, and incremental improvements. Her system represented a radical departure, trusting junior commanders with autonomous authority, relying on technology for critical coordination, and abandoning the comfort of sequential problem-solving. Captain Foster from the British Royal Navy raised what Isabella recognized as the core concern. Captain Rodriguez, your approach requires an extraordinary level of trust in subordinate commanders and untested technology. Naval tradition emphasizes proven leadership and reliable systems. Are we placing too much faith in innovations that haven't been tested under actual combat conditions? The question struck at the heart of the resistance Isabella faced throughout her career. Every innovation she proposed was dismissed as untested, while the proven methods failed repeatedly when confronted with modern challenges. She decided to address the underlying assumption directly. Captain Foster, respectfully, what we consider proven methods were once innovations themselves. Radar-guided gunnery was untested until World War II proved its effectiveness. Nuclear submarines were theoretical until they revolutionized underwater warfare. Carrier-based aviation was experimental until it transformed naval strategy. She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. The question isn't whether we should trust innovations. It's whether we can afford not to evolve when our adversaries are already implementing these capabilities. Admiral Mitchell, who had remained silent during most of the briefing, finally spoke. Captain Rodriguez, perhaps you could walk us through a specific scenario to demonstrate how your coordination system would handle a complex multi-domain crisis. Isabella had hoped for this opportunity. She activated a comprehensive simulation showing the South China Sea region with multiple threat indicators appearing simultaneously. Scenario: humanitarian crisis in the Philippines requires immediate naval response. Simultaneously, submarine contacts appear near shipping lanes. Surface vessels of unknown nationality begin aggressive maneuvers. Cyber attacks target regional communication networks, and aircraft conduct surveillance overflights of Allied facilities. The display showed the scenario unfolding in real time, with traditional response protocols struggling to address multiple simultaneous challenges. Using current methods, we would prioritize humanitarian response, then address submarine threats, then surface challenges, then cyber warfare, a sequential approach requiring hours to achieve comprehensive response. She switched to her integrated approach, showing coordination nodes activating across the region. With distributed coordination, humanitarian response begins immediately while specialized nodes address submarine threats, surface challenges, and cyber warfare simultaneously. AI coordination prevents resource conflicts and optimizes asset allocation. The simulation showed response times, resource utilization, and conflict resolution across all domains. Where traditional methods would have left critical vulnerabilities unaddressed for hours, the integrated approach provided comprehensive coverage within minutes. Admiral Tanaka studied the results carefully. Impressive simulation, Captain. But simulations can be programmed to validate any approach. How do we know this would work under actual crisis conditions? Isabella had expected this challenge and prepared her most important revelation. Admiral, this isn't just a simulation. These protocols were successfully tested during the Coral Sea incident 3 months ago. The briefing room fell silent. The Coral Sea incident had been classified, but every senior naval officer knew that something significant had occurred in that region, something that demonstrated unprecedented coordination between allied forces. Admiral Mitchell nodded permission for Isabella to continue. A coordinated Chinese probe tested our response capabilities across multiple domains simultaneously. Traditional protocols would have failed catastrophically. Instead, using early versions of these coordination systems, allied forces successfully countered every threat vector while maintaining complete operational security. She displayed declassified portions of the after-action report. Response time, 14 minutes for full multi-domain coverage. Resource efficiency, 93% optimization across all participating units. Mission success complete, with 0 casualties and minimal escalation. The numbers spoke louder than any theoretical argument. 14 minutes for comprehensive response to a coordinated, multi-domain attack represented a quantum leap in naval effectiveness. 0 casualties during a complex crisis demonstrated the practical value of her approach. Commander Williams from Canada asked the question everyone was thinking. Captain, if these protocols were so successful, why isn't this information more widely distributed? Because, Admiral Mitchell interjected, the Chinese probe was designed specifically to test our response capabilities. Revealing our coordination methods would compromise operational security for future conflicts. Isabella nodded. Pacific Guardian represents the first opportunity to train multinational forces in these protocols under controlled conditions. Success here could revolutionize how allied navies coordinate during actual crises. The weight of this revelation transformed the atmosphere in the briefing room. What had seemed like an experimental exercise now appeared as preparation for real-world challenges that had already proven deadly serious. The Chinese weren't just theoretical adversaries. They were actively testing allied capabilities and looking for weaknesses to exploit. Admiral Chun from Singapore was the first to speak after the long silence. Captain Rodriguez, assuming we proceed with your coordination protocols, what specific preparations are required from each participating navy? Isabella felt the shift in the room's energy. Questions were no longer challenging the fundamental concept, but focusing on implementation details. Each nation will designate liaison officers for training in the coordination system interface. Will establish communication protocols and conduct preliminary exercises to ensure system compatibility before the main operation begins. Over the next hour, the discussion evolved from skeptical questioning to detailed planning. Officers who had initially resisted the concept now contributed suggestions for improvement and adaptation to their specific naval capabilities. The transformation wasn't complete. Several senior officers remained visibly uncomfortable with the radical departure from traditional methods. But professional pragmatism was overcoming institutional resistance. Admiral Petrov from Russia made an observation that surprised everyone. Captain Rodriguez, your coordination approach resembles certain theoretical frameworks discussed in advanced strategic circles. Have you consulted with academic strategic planning institutions? Isabella recognized the compliment hidden within the question, but also the potential trap. Academic consultation could be interpreted as proof that her ideas were theoretical, rather than practical. Admiral, the coordination protocols were developed through operational experience and tested under combat conditions. Academic theory informed some aspects, but practical effectiveness drove the development process. As the briefing concluded, Admiral Mitchell addressed the assembled officers. Ladies and gentlemen, Pacific Guardian will proceed according to Captain Rodriguez's coordination framework. Detailed implementation schedules will be distributed this afternoon. Prepare your staff for intensive training over the next 2 weeks. The international officers filed out in small groups, their conversations animated with discussion of the coordination protocols and their implications. Isabella remained at the podium, organizing her materials while processing the session's success. She had convinced 12 allied navies to embrace a radical departure from traditional methods, no small achievement considering the institutional resistance to change that characterized military organizations. Admiral Mitchell approached as the last officers left the briefing theater. Well done, Captain. That was one of the most effective presentations I've witnessed in 30 years of naval service. Thank you, Admiral. I hope the exercise validates their confidence. It will, Mitchell replied with certainty. But you should know that General Harrison has been making inquiries about the Pacific Guardian. He's particularly interested in any deviations from standard Pacific exercise protocols. Isabella felt a familiar tension in her stomach. Harrison's opposition to her career advancement was becoming active interference with her current assignment. Has he raised specific concerns? Nothing official yet, Mitchell said carefully. But informal conversations suggest he believes the exercise is unnecessarily complicated and potentially destabilizing to traditional allied coordination methods. The implication was clear. Success wouldn't necessarily protect Isabella from Harrison's influence, and failure would certainly be used to validate his assessment of her capabilities. The stakes for Pacific Guardian had just become intensely personal. As Isabella left the briefing theater and walked through the carrier's corridors, she reflected on the morning's events. In 3 hours, she had convinced experienced naval officers from 12 nations to embrace revolutionary changes in maritime warfare coordination. The same strategic thinking that General Harrison dismissed as academic theory had just gained international support from some of the world's most respected naval professionals. But Isabella knew that success in the briefing room was only the beginning. Pacific Guardian would test her coordination protocols under conditions designed to simulate the chaos and uncertainty of actual warfare. If the exercise succeeded, it could transform multinational naval cooperation and validate her approach to modern maritime strategy. If it failed, General Harrison's prediction about her career would become a self-fulfilling prophecy. The next 2 weeks would determine everything. 2 weeks into Exercise Pacific Guardian, Captain Isabella Rodriguez stood in the Tactical Operations Center aboard the USS Constellation, watching her coordination protocols perform beyond even her most optimistic projections. The massive wall displays showed a living map of the Western Pacific, dotted with icons representing 63 vessels from 12 nations, all moving in perfect harmony despite managing 17 simultaneous training scenarios. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as skeptical cooperation from international allies had evolved into enthusiastic adoption of her methods. Japanese destroyers coordinated seamlessly with Australian frigates, while Indian submarines provided intelligence to Singapore patrol boats. The artificial intelligence coordination system processed thousands of communication exchanges per hour, allowing human commanders to focus on strategic decisions rather than routine coordination tasks. Commander Sarah Chun, Isabella's deputy operations officer approached with the latest efficiency reports. Captain, response times are averaging 11 minutes across all scenario types. Resource conflicts have dropped to less than 2%, and allied commanders are reporting the highest satisfaction ratings in Pacific exercise history. Isabella studied the data with professional satisfaction, tempered by growing concern. Success in this drama would inevitably attract attention from Washington, and she knew General Harrison was monitoring every aspect of the exercise. Excellence that challenged established doctrine could be as dangerous to her career as failure. Any communication from Fleet Command? Isabella asked. Admiral Mitchell received a priority message from the Pentagon 30 minutes ago, Chun replied. She's requested your presence in the flag conference room at 1400 hours. Isabella checked her chronometer. 20 minutes to prepare for what could be career-defining news. She spent the time reviewing exercise statistics, ensuring she could defend every aspect of Pacific Guardian's performance with concrete data. If Harrison was going to attack her methods, she would counter with irrefutable evidence of their effectiveness. The flag conference room occupied the most secure section of the carrier, designed for conversations requiring absolute privacy. Admiral Mitchell stood at the conference table, her expression unreadable as Isabella entered and saluted. Captain Rodriguez, please be seated. We have significant developments to discuss. Isabella took her seat, noting the secure communication equipment active on the conference table. Whatever news awaited her required real-time coordination with higher authorities. First, the positive news, Mitchell began. Pacific Guardian has exceeded every performance metric established for multinational naval exercises. Response efficiency, resource utilization, scenario completion rates, and allied satisfaction scores are all record-breaking. Your coordination protocols are being studied by strategic planning departments across the Pacific Fleet. Isabella felt a moment of pride before Mitchell's expression grew serious. However, General Harrison has formally requested a comprehensive review of the exercise parameters and your role in developing them. He's particularly concerned about what he terms unauthorized deviations from established Pacific exercise doctrine. The phrase carried ominous implications. Unauthorized deviations suggested insubordination, regardless of results. In military culture, following proper procedures often mattered more than achieving superior outcomes. Admiral, every aspect of Pacific Guardian was approved through appropriate channels, Isabella said carefully. Documentation shows explicit authorization for the coordination protocols and multi-scenario framework. I know, Mitchell replied. But Harrison is questioning whether those approvals were based on complete information about the scope of changes you were implementing. She paused. He's also raising concerns about your use of artificial intelligence systems that weren't fully tested through standard Navy evaluation procedures. Isabella felt her stomach tighten. The AI coordination system had been developed using rapid prototyping methods that bypassed traditional evaluation timelines, a necessity given the evolving threat environment, but potentially problematic from a bureaucratic perspective. The AI system underwent extensive testing during the Coral Sea incident, Isabella replied. Real-world validation under combat conditions should supersede laboratory testing requirements. In principle, yes, Mitchell agreed. But Harrison is arguing that using an untested system during Pacific Guardian without explicit approval represents a violation of exercise safety protocols. The accusation was technically accurate, but strategically ridiculous. Isabella had used a system proven effective under actual combat conditions, but hadn't completed bureaucratic paperwork that could have taken months. She had prioritized operational effectiveness over administrative compliance, exactly the kind of decision-making that effective military leaders should embrace. Admiral, is General Harrison recommending specific actions regarding my involvement in the exercise? Mitchell's expression grew grave. He's requested that you be relieved of operational authority pending a formal investigation into your adherence to established procedures. Admiral Thompson will arrive tomorrow to assume temporary command of the coordination protocols. The news hit Isabella like a physical blow. Admiral Richard Thompson was a traditionalist whose approach to naval strategy hadn't evolved significantly. In 20 years, his assumption of command would effectively end the integrated coordination that had made the Pacific Guardian so successful. Admiral, respectfully, Admiral Thompson has no experience with the coordination protocols. Transferring authority during active operations could compromise exercise effectiveness and potentially endanger participating vessels. I've made those exact arguments to General Harrison, Mitchell replied. His response was that traditional command structures have proven reliability, while your innovations represent unacceptable risks, regardless of their apparent success. Isabella struggled to process the logic. Her methods had demonstrably superior results, proven effectiveness under combat conditions, and enthusiastic support from international allies. Yet she was being relieved for following procedures that prioritized results over bureaucratic compliance. Is there any avenue for appeal or delay? Isabella asked. Limited options, Mitchell admitted. The investigation will take several weeks, during which time you'll be restricted to advisory roles. Admiral Thompson will implement traditional exercise protocols for the remainder of Pacific Guardian. Isabella understood the implications immediately. Traditional protocols would reduce exercise effectiveness, disappoint allied participants, and validate Harrison's criticism of her approach. The failure wouldn't be attributed to the abandonment of her methods, it would be blamed on the disruption caused by changing leadership. Before Isabella could respond, the conference room's secure communication system activated. Admiral Patricia Walsh, commander of the Pacific Fleet, appeared on the main display. Her 4 stars and reputation for strategic brilliance commanded immediate attention from both officers. Admiral Mitchell, Captain Rodriguez, Walsh's voice, carried the authority of absolute command. I've been monitoring the situation regarding Pacific Guardian and General Harrison's concerns. Isabella remained silent, knowing that Admiral Walsh's words would determine her immediate future and potentially her entire career trajectory. Captain Rodriguez, your coordination protocols represent the most significant advancement in multinational naval cooperation in the past 2 decades. Pacific Guardian's success metrics exceed every historical benchmark for large-scale naval exercises. Isabella felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by Admiral Walsh's serious expression. However, General Harrison has raised procedural concerns that cannot be ignored within the current command structure. The Pentagon requires absolute confidence in the authorization and testing protocols for any systems used during major multinational operations. Admiral Walsh paused, studying Isabella through the video connection. Captain, I'm going to offer you a choice that I've never presented to an officer at your rank. Isabella felt her pulse quicken. Unprecedented offers from 4-star admirals typically carried life-changing implications. Option 1. Accept reassignment to administrative duties while the investigation proceeds. Admiral Thompson assumes command of Pacific Guardian, implements traditional protocols, and you face whatever consequences emerge from the procedural review. The option was clearly unacceptable career suicide disguised as bureaucratic process. Option 2. I'm authorizing an emergency field test of your coordination protocols under actual operational conditions. Intelligence indicates that Chinese naval forces are planning a major provocation in the South China Sea within the next 72 hours. If you're willing to assume full responsibility for the coordination systems, Pacific Guardian will transition from exercise to active defense operations. Isabella's mind raced through the implications. Active operations would validate her methods under real combat conditions, but failure would end her career and potentially endanger allied forces. Success would vindicate her approach, but might not overcome Harrison's bureaucratic opposition. Admiral Walsh, what are the specific parameters of the Chinese provocation? Coordinated submarine infiltration, surface vessel harassment of Allied shipping, cyber attacks on regional communication, networks, and aerial reconnaissance overflights. Exactly the multi-domain scenario your protocols were designed to address. Isabella realized that the Chinese had been monitoring Pacific Guardian and planned their provocation to exploit traditional naval response limitations. Her coordination protocols represented the only realistic defense against their sophisticated approach. Admiral, I accept full responsibility for the coordination systems during active operations. Admiral Walsh nodded approvingly. Captain Rodriguez, as of this moment, you have operational authority over all Pacific Guardian assets for maritime defense operations. Admiral Mitchell will provide administrative support, and Admiral Thompson's arrival will be delayed pending resolution of the active crisis. Isabella felt the weight of command settle on her shoulders. 63 vessels from 12 nations, thousands of sailors, and the strategic balance of the Pacific region now depended on coordination protocols that General Harrison considered unauthorized experiments. Admiral Walsh, what are my authorities regarding engagement rules and Allied coordination? Full defensive authorities under Pacific Mutual Defense Agreements. Engage any hostile actions according to established rules of engagement. Your coordination protocols are hereby approved for active operations under emergency authorization. The emergency authorization was exactly what Isabella needed. Official approval that superseded normal bureaucratic requirements. Harrison couldn't challenge procedures that had been explicitly authorized by the Pacific Fleet Commander during active operations. As the communication ended, Admiral Mitchell turned to Isabella with a mixture of admiration and concern. Captain, you understand what you've just accepted? If this operation fails, Harrison will have everything he needs to end your career. Success might not be enough to protect you from his influence. Isabella stood, her decision made. Admiral, my career isn't worth risking Allied sailors' lives by using inferior coordination methods. If General Harrison wants to end my advancement because I prioritized operational effectiveness over bureaucratic compliance, so be it. Mitchell nodded with evident respect. Very well, Captain. What are your immediate requirements for transitioning from exercise to active operations? Isabella was already mentally restructuring the coordination protocols for real-world engagement. First, I need secure communication with all Allied commanders to brief them on the operational transition. Second, intelligence updates on Chinese forces positions and likely attack vectors. Third, authorization to modify exercise scenarios to match actual threat patterns. You'll have everything within the hour, Mitchell assured her. Captain, for what it's worth, this is the kind of leadership decision that creates legends in naval history. Isabella allowed herself a slight smile, or cautionary tales about officers who exceeded their authority. As she left the conference room and returned to the Tactical Operations Center, Isabella knew that the next 72 hours would determine everything. Her coordination protocols would face their ultimate test under conditions that could validate or destroy her career. General Harrison's prediction about her future would either be proven correct or thoroughly discredited. But Isabella also knew something that Harrison couldn't understand. Her methods worked because they reflected the reality of modern warfare rather than the comfort of traditional procedures. The Chinese provocation would test not just her coordination protocols, but the fundamental question of whether innovation could overcome institutional resistance. The storm was gathering, and Captain Isabella Rodriguez stood at its center, ready to prove that the future of naval warfare belonged to those willing to embrace its complexities rather than retreat into familiar SIMPL, ICITIES. As she began issuing orders to transition Pacific Guardian from exercise to active defense operations, Isabella felt the weight of history pressing upon her decisions. Somewhere in the vast Pacific, Chinese forces were preparing to challenge everything the Allied navies thought they knew about modern maritime conflict. She intended to teach them why that assumption was dangerously wrong. The tactical operations center aboard the USS Constellation had transformed into the nerve center of the largest multinational naval defense operation in Pacific history. Captain Isabella Rodriguez stood before the massive display wall, watching as her coordination protocols orchestrated the movements of 63 vessels across thousands of square miles of ocean. What had begun as Exercise Pacific Guardian 18 hours ago was now Operation Shield Wall, an active defense against coordinated Chinese maritime aggression. Intelligence Officer Lieutenant Commander Marcus Webb approached with the latest satellite reconnaissance data. Captain, Chinese submarine activity has intensified significantly. We're tracking at least 12 nuclear attack submarines moving toward shipping lanes between Taiwan and the Philippines. Surface vessels are maintaining formation, approximately 200 nautical miles southeast of their submarine positions. Isabella studied the developing threat pattern with growing concern. The Chinese weren't simply testing Allied response capabilities. They were implementing a sophisticated multi-domain strategy designed to overwhelm traditional naval defense systems. Submarine infiltration would force Allied vessels to respond defensively while surface ships positioned themselves to exploit any gaps in coverage. Meanwhile, cyber warfare units would attempt to disrupt communications during the chaos. "What's the status of our coordination nodes?" Isabella asked. "All 12 nodes are operational and maintain real-time communication," reported Commander Chun from her position at the AI coordination console. "Response algorithms are processing threat data from 17 different intelligence sources and updating tactical recommendations every 43 seconds. Isabella nodded with satisfaction. Her distributed command structure was performing exactly as designed, allowing regional commanders to respond to immediate threats while maintaining strategic coordination across the entire operation. Traditional centralized command would have been overwhelmed by the complexity and scale of the developing crisis. "Captain Rodriguez," Admiral Mitchell's voice came through the secure communication system. "I have General Harrison requesting an immediate conference. He's demanding an update on the transition from exercise to active operations." Isabella felt her jaw tighten. Even during an active crisis, Harrison continued his campaign to undermine her authority. She glanced at the tactical display, showing Chinese forces moving into attack positions, and made a decision that prioritized operational effectiveness over bureaucratic politics. "Admiral, please inform General Harrison that I'm currently managing active defense operations and will provide a comprehensive briefing once the immediate threat is neutralized." The silence that followed her response suggested that Admiral Mitchell understood the implications. Isabella was essentially refusing a direct request from a superior officer, technically insubordination, but arguably justified by operational necessities. "Understood, Captain. I'll handle the communication with General Harrison." As Admiral, Mitchell's voice faded. Isabella turned her attention to the most critical challenge: coordinating defensive responses across 12 different naval traditions while managing real-time threat evolution. The Chinese strategy was specifically designed to exploit the communication delays and coordination difficulties that plagued traditional multinational operations. "All stations, this is Constellation Actual," Isabella spoke into the Fleet Communication Network. "Chinese forces are implementing coordinated provocation across multiple domains. Transition to Defense Condition 2. All coordination nodes report readiness status." The responses came back in rapid succession. Node Alpha operational Japanese. Maritime Self-Defense Force ready for submarine countermeasures. Node Bravo operational Royal Australian Navy surface groups in position. Node Charlie operational. Republic of Korea Navy Air Defense Systems active. Each confirmation represented months of preparation and trust building between allied forces. Isabella's coordination protocols had transformed traditional suspicion and competition into unprecedented cooperation, creating a defensive network that was greater than the sum of its parts. Contact bearing 095, range 40 nautical miles, announced sonar operator Petty Officer Rivera. Submarine signature consistent with Chinese Type 095 nuclear attack boat. Depth approximately 300 feet, speed 15 knots. Isabella processed the information quickly. A Type 095 submarine in that position could threaten 3 different shipping lanes while remaining outside traditional territorial boundaries. Exactly the kind of ambiguous provocation designed to test Allied resolve without providing clear justification for military response. Node Alpha, this is Constellation Actual, submarine contact designated Sierra 1. Recommend passive tracking and preparation for active countermeasures pending hostile action. Constellation Actual, Node Alpha acknowledges. JMSDF, submarine Hakuryu, moving to intercept position. Maintaining passive posture unless Sierra 1 demonstrates hostile intent. Isabella watched the tactical display update as Japanese and Chinese submarines began an underwater chess match that could determine the course of the entire crisis. Traditional protocols would have required extensive consultation and authorization delays before Allied submarines could respond to potential threats. Her coordination system enabled immediate response while maintaining appropriate escalation. Control. Captain, Commander Chun called from the AI coordination station. The system is detecting coordinated cyber intrusion attempts, targeting communication satellites serving the Philippines and Taiwan. Signature patterns match Chinese PLAA cyber warfare units. Isabella had anticipated this development. Chinese strategy relied on degrading Allied communications during submarine and surface operations, creating confusion that their forces could exploit. Her coordination protocols included cybersecurity measures specifically designed to counter such attacks. Activate Cyber Defense Protocol 7, Isabella ordered. Redirect primary communications through hardened military satellites and implement quantum encryption for all internode traffic. The AI coordination system executed her commands within seconds, seamlessly transitioning 63 vessels to secure communication networks without interrupting ongoing operations. Allied commanders experienced no degradation in their ability to coordinate responses, while Chinese cyber attacks found themselves targeting empty communication channels. Ma'am, Intelligence Officer Webb reported. Satellite reconnaissance shows Chinese surface vessels accelerating toward international shipping lanes. Time to intercept merchant traffic. Approximately 4 hours at current speed. Isabella recognized the escalation pattern. Chinese forces would position themselves to threaten civilian shipping while maintaining that their activities occurred in international waters. Any Allied response could be characterized as aggression against lawful naval operations, creating a propaganda victory regardless of the military outcome. Node Bravo, this is Constellation Actual. The Chinese surface group designated Tango 4. Approaching shipping lanes. Recommend positioning Royal Australian Navy vessels to provide escort protection for merchant traffic. Constellation Actual, Node Bravo acknowledges. HMAS Perth and Brisbane adjusting course to intercept. Estimated arrival at shipping lane intersection, 3 hours 20 minutes. Isabella felt a moment of satisfaction as her coordination system demonstrated its effectiveness. Australian vessels would arrive ahead of Chinese forces, establishing Allied presence in international waters before any confrontation could develop. Traditional response protocols would have required hours of consultation before Allied ships could be repositioned. The secure communication system activated again, and Admiral Walsh's face appeared on the display. Her expression was tense but determined. Captain Rodriguez, situation report. Admiral, Chinese forces are implementing coordinated submarine infiltration, surface vessel positioning, and cyber warfare operations. All 12 coordination nodes are operational and responding according to defensive protocols. No hostile actions have occurred, but Chinese positioning suggests imminent provocation. What's your assessment of Chinese objectives? Isabella had been analyzing this question since the crisis began. Admiral, they're testing our response integration and looking for exploitation opportunities. Traditional defense methods would leave gaps they could exploit for propaganda victories or actual territorial gains. Our coordination protocols are denying them those opportunities. Admiral Walsh nodded approvingly. Captain, I've been monitoring the operation from Pearl Harbor. Your coordination is the most effective multinational defense I've witnessed in 30 years of naval service. However, General Harrison has escalated his concerns to the Secretary of Defense. Isabella felt her stomach drop. Secretary-level involvement meant that political considerations could override operational effectiveness, regardless of results. What are General Harrison's specific allegations? Unauthorized deployment of untested systems during active operations, deviation from established defense protocols, and potential compromise of allied safety through experimental procedures. Isabella recognized the careful wording. Harrison was framing her innovations as reckless experimentation rather than proven improvements, using bureaucratic language to undermine operational success. Admiral, every aspect of the coordination system has been tested under actual combat conditions. The Coral Sea incident validated these exact protocols against similar Chinese provocations. I know, Captain, but Harrison is arguing that the scale of current operations exceeds previous testing parameters, making this an unauthorized field experiment using allied forces as test subjects. Isabella understood the political trap. Success would be attributed to lucky experimentation rather than superior planning, while any problems would validate Harrison's criticism of her methods. There was no winning scenario that would satisfy his predetermined conclusions. Admiral Walsh, what are my current authorities regarding the operation? Full defensive command until the crisis resolves or higher authority intervenes. However, Secretary Blackwood wants a real-time briefing on the situation within 2 hours. Isabella checked her chronometer. 2 hours to demonstrate that her coordination protocols could successfully defend against Chinese provocation while maintaining allied unity and avoiding escalation. The briefing would occur while managing active operations, adding political performance requirements to an already complex military situation. Understood, Admiral. I'll provide comprehensive documentation of all operational decisions and their results. As Admiral Walsh's communication ended, Isabella reflected on the irony of her situation. She was successfully coordinating the most complex multinational naval defense in Pacific history, but her career remained threatened by a general who prioritized procedural compliance over operational effectiveness. Captain, sonar operator Rivera called urgently. Sierra 1 has changed course and increased speed. New bearing 270, speed 22 knots. Intercept course with merchant vessel. Eastern Star. Isabella felt the crisis shift into a new phase. The Chinese submarine was moving toward a civilian target, crossing the line from ambiguous positioning to potential hostile action. Her response would need to protect the merchant vessel while avoiding escalation that could be characterized as allied aggression. Node Alpha, this is Constellation Actual. Sierra 1, demonstrating hostile intent toward civilian shipping. Authorize active countermeasures to protect merchant traffic. Constellation Actual, Node Alpha. Hakuryu moving to intercept. Warning signals being transmitted to Sierra 1 on international emergency frequencies. Isabella watched the underwater drama unfold on her tactical display. Two nuclear submarines were converging on a collision course, with a civilian merchant vessel caught between them. The next few minutes would test whether her coordination protocols could prevent the crisis from escalating into actual combat. Tactical display showed Hakuryu positioning herself between the Chinese submarine and the merchant vessel, while broadcasting warnings on multiple frequencies. Sierra 1 continued its approach for several tense minutes before finally altering course away from the shipping lane. Constellation Actual. Node Alpha reports Sierra 1 has discontinued intercept course. Merchant vessel Eastern Star is clear of immediate threat. Hakuryu maintains a protective position. Isabella felt a surge of relief mixed with professional pride. Her coordination system had successfully managed the first direct confrontation of the crisis, protecting civilian shipping, while avoiding escalation. Traditional protocols would have required extensive consultation that could have allowed the Chinese submarine to complete its harassment mission, but she also knew that this was only the beginning. Chinese forces had multiple options for escalation, and each success would prompt them to attempt more sophisticated provocations. The next several hours would test every aspect of her coordination protocols, under increasingly challenging conditions. As she prepared for the next phase of the crisis, Isabella understood that she was fighting two battles simultaneously. One against Chinese forces threatening Pacific stability, and another against bureaucratic resistance that could undermine effective defense regardless of operational success. The question was no longer whether her coordination protocols could succeed. They were already proving their effectiveness. The question was whether institutional politics would allow that success to continue. The video conference with Secretary of Defense Margaret Blackwood was scheduled to begin in 12 minutes, but Captain Isabella Rodriguez faced a crisis that wouldn't wait for bureaucratic convenience. The tactical displays surrounding her in the Constellation's command center showed a nightmare scenario unfolding across the Western Pacific. Chinese forces had escalated beyond submarine harassment to a coordinated assault on the entire regional security framework. "Captain, we have multiple emergencies developing simultaneously," reported Intelligence Officer Webb, his voice tight with stress. Chinese cyber attacks have successfully penetrated Taiwanese air defense networks. Their surface vessels are jamming GPS signals across major shipping routes, and we're detecting preparation signatures for ballistic missile launches from the South China Sea. Isabella processed the information with the cold efficiency that had defined her career. The Chinese weren't simply testing Allied responses anymore. They were implementing what appeared to be the opening phase of a major territorial grab, timing their actions to coincide with the moment when Allied forces were scattered across training positions rather than concentrated for defense. "Status of our coordination nodes?" Isabella asked, her fingers already working the command interface to reshape the entire defensive posture. "All nodes are operational, but Node Delta reports significant stress on their systems," Commander Chun replied from the AI coordination station. "The Taiwanese naval units are requesting immediate assistance with cyber defense, while Node Echo reports that Indian naval aviation is detecting Chinese submarine-launched ballistic missile preparations." Isabella realized that the Chinese had studied Pacific Guardians exercise patterns and timed their assault to exploit the precise moment when Allied forces would be most dispersed. It was strategically brilliant and tactically devastating, unless her coordination protocols could adapt faster than traditional command structures could even comprehend the scope of the crisis. "All nodes, this is Constellation Actual. Emergency Priority Alpha. Chinese forces are implementing coordinated territorial assault. Execute Contingency Plan Omega-7 immediately." Contingency Plan Omega-7 was something Isabella had developed in secret during the exercise planning phase, a rapid concentration protocol that could transform scattered training forces into a defensive battle formation within minutes rather than hours. She had never mentioned it in official documentation, Knowing that traditionalists like General Harrison would have dismissed it as unnecessarily aggressive, the responses came back with startling speed. Node Alpha executing concentration protocol. Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force shifting to combat formation. Node Bravo acknowledging. Royal Australian Navy assuming battle stations. Node Charlie confirmed. Republic of Korea Navy activating full defensive posture. Each acknowledgement represented a radical departure from exercise protocols. But Isabella's months of preparation and relationship building with allied commanders now paid dividends. They trusted her judgment enough to abandon planned exercises and assume combat readiness based on her assessment alone. Captain Rodriguez, Admiral Mitchell's voice carried urgency through the communication system. Secretary Blackwood is standing by for your briefing, but General Harrison is demanding that you explain your authorization for implementing Omega-7. He's claiming you've exceeded your operational mandate. Isabella felt a familiar surge of anger at Harrison's timing. While Chinese forces threatened the entire Pacific balance of power, he was focused on bureaucratic procedure rather than strategic necessity. She made a decision that would either save the regional alliance or end her career definitively. Admiral, please inform Secretary Blackwood that I'm implementing emergency defensive measures against imminent Chinese territorial assault. Full briefing will follow once immediate threats are neutralized. If General Harrison questions my authorization, remind him that allowing enemy forces to succeed while following incorrect procedures is not superior leadership. The silence that followed her statement was profound. Isabella had essentially told a general to focus on strategic priorities, rather than bureaucratic compliance insubordination that would normally result in immediate relief of command. Understood, Captain. Proceeding with your recommendations. Isabella turned her attention to the developing crisis, where Chinese coordination was proving as sophisticated as her own. Their submarine forces were approaching critical shipping lanes, while their surface vessels jammed communication and navigation systems. Meanwhile, cyber attacks were degrading Allied air defense capabilities precisely when ballistic missile launches appeared imminent. Node Delta, this is Constellation Actual. Taiwanese air defense networks under active cyber assault. Recommend immediate implementation of hardened backup systems and coordination through our secure quantum encryption channels. Constellation Actual, Node Delta. Taiwanese Naval Command acknowledges. Transitioning to backup systems now. Cyber attack intensity is extreme. They're using military-grade intrusion protocols. Isabella recognized the escalation. Military-grade. Cyber attacks represented a significant step beyond harassment toward actual warfare. The Chinese were no longer testing Allied responses. They were attempting to disable them entirely. Node Echo, report on submarine-launched ballistic missile preparations. Constellation Actual. Node Echo. Indian Naval Aviation confirms Chinese ballistic missile submarine Changzheng 18 in launch position, approximately 400 nautical miles southwest of Taiwan. Missile preparation signatures are consistent, with intermediate-range ballistic missiles capable of reaching Taiwanese air bases and Japanese naval facilities. Isabella felt the weight of history pressing down on her decisions. Chinese ballistic missile submarines preparing to strike Allied facilities represented the most serious escalation in Pacific tensions since World War II. Her response would either prevent regional war or potentially trigger it through miscalculation. All nodes, this is Constellation Actual. Chinese ballistic missile submarine, designated Whiskey 7, preparing for launch against Allied facilities. Execute Defensive Protocol Delta 9 immediately. Protocol Delta 9 was Isabella's most controversial contingency plan coordinated. Allied submarine response to neutralize ballistic missile threats before launch completion. It represented aggressive defensive action that could be characterized as preemptive attack, but Isabella understood that allowing ballistic missiles To launch successfully would guarantee regional war rather than prevent it. Constellation Actual, Node Alpha, JMSDF, submarine Soryu moving to intercept position. Time to optimal firing solution, 14 minutes. Constellation Actual, Node Echo, Indian Naval Submarine Chakra acknowledging intercept coordinates. Combined approach authorized by National Command Authority. Isabella watched her tactical display show Allied submarines converging on the Chinese ballistic missile boat with precision that would have been impossible under traditional coordination methods. Her AI-assisted coordination system calculated optimal approach vectors while accounting for underwater terrain, current patterns, and enemy sensor capabilities. The secure communication system activated, showing Secretary of Defense Blackwood's stern face on the main display. Behind her, Isabella could see the Crisis Management Center at the Pentagon, with multiple screens showing the Pacific situation from various intelligence sources. Captain Rodriguez, I understand you're managing an escalating crisis, but I need an immediate explanation of your decision to implement offensive submarine operations against Chinese forces. Isabella recognized the carefully chosen words. Offensive submarine operations framed her defensive actions as aggression, potentially creating legal and political complications, regardless of their military necessity. Madam Secretary, Chinese ballistic missile submarines are preparing to launch attacks against Allied air bases and naval facilities. Defensive action to prevent those launches is justified under existing mutual defense agreements and rules of engagement. Captain, General Harrison contends that your actions exceed defensive parameters and constitute unauthorized escalation of hostilities. Isabella could see General Harrison standing behind Secretary Blackwood, his expression combining satisfaction and concern. He was achieving his goal of undermining her authority, but the timing threatened to hand Chinese forces a strategic victory through Allied indecision. Madam Secretary, respectfully, allowing enemy ballistic missiles to launch successfully against Allied facilities would represent defensive failure, not adherence to proper procedure. The Chinese are implementing coordinated assault designed to exploit traditional response delays. Secretary Blackwood studied Isabella through the video connection for several long seconds. Captain, you're essentially arguing that aggressive action is necessary to prevent larger conflict. Yes, Madam Secretary. Chinese strategy relies on Allied forces, following traditional consultation and authorization procedures that require hours rather than minutes. My coordination protocols enable immediate defensive response that neutralizes threats before they can achieve strategic objectives. And if your assessment is incorrect, if Chinese activities represent harassment rather than actual assault preparation, Isabella had anticipated this question and prepared her most important argument. Madam Secretary, if I'm wrong, we've responded to harassment with appropriate defensive measures that can be scaled back immediately. If General Harrison's approach is wrong, Allied air bases and naval facilities will be destroyed while we're still requesting authorization to defend them. The stark choice was exactly what Isabella needed to present. Military decision-makers understood that some mistakes could be corrected while others were permanently catastrophic. Captain Rodriguez, you have authorization to continue defensive operations, but any expansion beyond immediate threat neutralization requires explicit approval from this office. Isabella felt relief flood through her as the authorization validated her approach. Understood, Madam Secretary. Focusing on immediate threat neutralization. As the communication ended, Isabella noticed General Harrison's expression of barely controlled fury. His bureaucratic campaign against her had failed at the crucial moment, but she knew he would find other opportunities to undermine her career once the immediate crisis passed. Captain, Commander Chun called urgently. Node Alpha reports Soryu has achieved firing solution on Whiskey 7. A Chinese ballistic missile submarine is continuing its launch preparation sequence. Estimated time to missile launch, 8 minutes. Isabella faced the most critical decision of her career. Authorizing Allied submarines to attack Chinese forces could trigger regional war, but allowing ballistic missiles to launch successfully would guarantee far more devastating conflict. Note Alpha, this is Constellation Actual. If Whiskey 7 continues launch preparation beyond 6 minutes, you are authorized to neutralize the threat. Use the minimum force necessary to prevent missile launch. Constellation Actual, Node Alpha. Acknowledged, Soryu standing by for threat neutralization. Isabella watched the tactical display show underwater forces maneuvering in deadly silence beneath the Pacific surface. 2 nuclear submarines were approaching weapon range while a third prepared to launch ballistic missiles that could reshape the regional balance of power. Her coordination protocols had created this confrontation, but they had also provided the only realistic chance of preventing catastrophic escalation. Captain, Chinese surface vessels are altering course toward our coordination nodes, reported Intelligence Officer Webb. Satellite reconnaissance shows at least 8 destroyers and 2 cruisers moving to intercept Allied formations. They appear to be timing their approach to coincide with the ballistic missile launch window. Isabella understood the Chinese strategy with crystalline clarity. Their ballistic missile submarines would launch attacks against Allied facilities, while their surface vessels engaged Allied naval forces, creating multiple simultaneous crises that would overwhelm traditional command and control systems. Only her integrated coordination protocols offered any chance of managing such complex multi-domain warfare. All nodes, this is Constellation Actual. Chinese surface forces moving to engagement positions. Prepare for coordinated surface and subsurface combat. Maintain defensive posture until hostile action is confirmed, then execute full defensive protocols. The next few minutes would determine whether Captain Isabella Rodriguez had prevented regional war through innovative leadership or triggered it through unauthorized aggression. Her coordination protocols would face their ultimate test under conditions that no exercise could simulate. As she prepared for what could become the largest naval engagement in Pacific history, Isabella reflected on the irony that her career's greatest moment might also be its end. Success would validate her methods but might not overcome institutional resistance to change. Failure would confirm every criticism that traditionalists had leveled against her innovations. But as she watched Allied forces coordinate with unprecedented efficiency while facing existential threats, Isabella knew that she had chosen correctly. The future of Pacific security depended not on following comfortable procedures, but on adapting to dangerous realities with whatever tools proved most effective. The storm was reaching its peak, and Captain Isabella Rodriguez stood at its center, ready to prove that leadership meant making hard decisions rather than following easy rules. The underwater explosion that shook the Western Pacific at 14:37 hours on that October afternoon would be remembered as the moment modern naval warfare changed forever. Captain Isabella Rodriguez watched the tactical display as JMSDF submarine Soryu successfully disabled the Chinese ballistic missile submarine Shangzheng 18 with a precisely targeted torpedo that destroyed the missile launch tubes without sinking. The vessel a feat of coordination and precision that would have been impossible under traditional command structures. Constellation Actual, Node Alpha reports successful threat neutralization, came the calm voice from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force. Whiskey 7 is disabled and surfacing. No ballistic missile launch capability remaining. Chinese crew abandoning damaged sections. Isabella felt a surge of relief mixed with the sobering knowledge that she had just authorized the first submarine-on-submarine engagement in the Pacific since World War II. Her decision had prevented potential ballistic missile strikes against Allied facilities, but it had also crossed a threshold that could never be uncrossed. All nodes, this is Constellation Actual. Primary ballistic missile threat neutralized. Chinese surface forces are still approaching engagement positions. Maintain defensive formation and prepare for surface combat operations. The tactical display showed a complex three-dimensional battle developing across thousands of square miles of ocean. Chinese destroyers and cruisers were accelerating toward Allied formations, while additional submarines attempted to exploit the chaos created by the ballistic missile incident. Isabella's coordination protocols were managing 17 separate engagements simultaneously, orchestrating the movements of 63 Allied vessels with precision that no human commander could match. Captain, Commander Chun reported from the AI coordination station. The system is processing over 4,000 tactical decisions per minute. Response optimization is at 97% efficiency across all engagement zones. Allied commanders report complete confidence in coordination protocols. Isabella nodded grimly. Her coordination system was performing flawlessly under the most challenging conditions imaginable, but she knew that success in battle wouldn't necessarily translate to success in Washington. General Harrison would undoubtedly argue that her aggressive defensive actions had triggered the very conflict she claimed to be preventing. The secure communication system activated, showing Admiral Walsh's face on the main display. Behind her, Isabella could see the Crisis Management Center at Pearl Harbor, where senior Pacific Fleet officers were monitoring the engagement in real time. Captain Rodriguez, situation report. Admiral, the Chinese ballistic missile threat has been neutralized with minimal escalation. Surface engagement develops across multiple zones, but Allied coordination is maintaining tactical advantage. No Allied casualties reported. Admiral Walsh studied the tactical data streaming across her displays. Captain, I'm watching coordination efficiency that I didn't think was possible. Your protocols are managing complexity that would have overwhelmed traditional command structures completely. Isabella felt a moment of professional pride before the weight of ongoing operations refocused her attention. Thank you, Admiral. The system is performing as designed, but Chinese forces are adapting their tactics in real time. We need to maintain pressure to prevent them from regrouping. Understood. Captain, I want you to know that Secretary Blackwood and the Joint Chiefs are monitoring this operation directly. Your coordination of this engagement is being studied as a potential model for future Pacific defense operations. The implications of Admiral Walsh's words were staggering. Isabella's coordination protocols weren't just being evaluated for their immediate effectiveness. They were being considered as the foundation for entirely new approaches to regional security. Success here could revolutionize how Allied forces coordinated across the Pacific. Admiral, what's the status of General Harrison's concerns about my operational authority? Admiral Walsh's expression grew serious. General Harrison has been temporarily relieved of oversight responsibilities for this operation. Secretary Blackwood determined that his procedural concerns were interfering with effective crisis management. You have complete operational authority until the situation stabilizes. Isabella felt a mixture of vindication and concern. Harrison's removal validated her approach, but it also meant that powerful enemies in Washington would be looking for opportunities to undermine her once the immediate crisis passed. Contact bearing 270, range 25 nautical miles, announced sonar operator Rivera. Multiple surface contacts approaching at high speed. Signature analysis indicates Chinese Type 055 destroyers with advanced anti-ship missile capabilities. Isabella recognized the threat immediately. Chinese Type 055 destroyers represented their most advanced surface combatants, equipped with long-range missiles capable of engaging Allied vessels before they could respond effectively. Traditional fleet defense would require concentrating forces in vulnerable formations, but her coordination protocols offered a different approach. Node Bravo, this is Constellation Actual. Chinese Type 055 destroyers approaching from bearing 270. Recommend distributed engagement pattern, Foxtrot 3. Constellation actual, Node Bravo acknowledges. Royal Australian Navy vessels. Assuming distributed formation. HMAS Perth, Brisbane, and Melbourne coordinating dispersed missile defense. Isabella watched the tactical display show Allied vessels spreading across a wide area while maintaining coordinated fire control through Hurry I systems. Instead of concentrating in traditional formations that Chinese missiles were designed to defeat, her forces would engage from multiple angles simultaneously, overwhelming enemy targeting systems. Node Charlie, Node Delta, coordinate with Node Bravo for simultaneous engagement. Chinese destroyers expecting a traditional concentrated response. Give them something they haven't trained for. The next 15 minutes unfolded like a deadly ballet choreographed by artificial intelligence and executed by human skill. Allied vessels maneuvered in complex patterns that would have been impossible to coordinate through traditional communication. Methods. While Isabella's AI systems calculated optimal firing solutions and engagement timing across dozens of platforms simultaneously, Chinese forces, trained to counter traditional Western naval tactics, found themselves facing an entirely new form of warfare that their doctrine couldn't address. As Allied missiles approached from multiple vectors, while their targets maneuvered in unpredictable patterns, the technological superiority of Chinese individual platforms was negated by the coordination advantages of Isabella's integrated network. Constellation. Actual, Node Bravo reports successful engagement. 3 Chinese destroyers disabled, the remainder withdrawing toward territorial waters. Allied vessels maintain pursuit formation. Isabella felt the tide of battle shifting decisively. Chinese forces, designed to exploit the coordination weaknesses of traditional Allied operations, were discovering that those weaknesses no longer existed. Her coordination protocols had transformed a collection of individual ships into a unified weapon system that operated with efficiency approaching that of a single vessel. All nodes, this is Constellation Actual. Chinese surface forces are withdrawing. Maintain defensive pursuit, but do not cross territorial boundaries. The objective is stabilization, not escalation. As the immediate tactical situation stabilized, Isabella became aware of increased activity in the Constellation's communication center. Multiple secure channels were active simultaneously, indicating high-level political coordination regarding the operation's outcome. Admiral Mitchell approached with a secure tablet displaying priority messages from Washington. Captain Secretary Blackwood wants immediate debriefing on the coordination protocols and their performance during the engagement. The Joint Chiefs are requesting detailed analysis for potential fleet-wide implementation. Isabella studied the messages, recognizing the language of institutional transformation. Her coordination protocols weren't just being evaluated as emergency measures, they were being considered as the new standard for Pacific Fleet operations. Admiral, what's the timeline for the debriefing? Secretary Blackwood wants to speak with you directly within the hour. Admiral Walsh will participate, along with representatives from each Allied nation that participated in the operation. Isabella understood the significance immediately. A multinational debriefing at the Secretary of Defense level meant that her coordination protocols were being evaluated for adoption across the entire Pacific Alliance structure. Success would vindicate not just her methods, but her entire approach to modern naval warfare. The video conference began precisely on schedule, with Secretary Blackwood appearing on the main display alongside Admiral Walsh and senior officers from all 12 Allied nations. Isabella recognized several faces from the international briefing she had conducted weeks earlier, but their expressions had transformed from skepticism to professional respect. Captain Rodriguez, Secretary Blackwood began, preliminary analysis indicates that your coordination protocols achieved tactical results that would have been impossible using traditional methods. Allied forces suffered 0 casualties while neutralizing coordinated Chinese aggression across multiple domains. That's unprecedented in modern naval warfare. Isabella maintained professional composure despite feeling profound satisfaction. Thank you, Madam Secretary. The coordination system performed as designed, but success required exceptional skill and courage from Allied commanders who trusted innovative methods despite institutional pressure to maintain traditional approaches. Admiral Tanaka from the Japanese Maritime Self-Defense Force spoke next. Captain Rodriguez, your coordination enabled our submarine to neutralize the ballistic missile threat with precision that saved thousands of potential casualties. Traditional command structures would have required consultation delays that could have resulted in catastrophic missile launches. Similar testimonials came from each Allied representative, creating a comprehensive validation of Isabella's approach. From the international community that would implement any new coordination standards. The political implications were clear. Allied nations were prepared to adopt her methods, regardless of American institutional resistance. Secretary Blackwood studied Isabella through the video connection. Captain, based on operational results and Allied support, I'm authorizing immediate implementation of your coordination protocols across the Pacific Fleet. You'll be promoted to Rear Admiral and assigned as Director of Advanced Naval Coordination, reporting directly to the Pacific Fleet Commander. Isabella felt the weight of vindication and responsibility settle on her shoulders simultaneously. The promotion to Rear Admiral represented validation of everything she had worked toward, but the assignment meant that her methods would be tested on an even larger scale with correspondingly greater consequences for failure. Thank you, Madam Secretary. I'm honored by the confidence and ready to serve in whatever capacity best supports Pacific security. As the conference concluded, Isabella reflected on the extraordinary reversal of her circumstances. 6 months earlier, General Harrison had publicly declared that she would never make Admiral. Today, she was being promoted to Rear Admiral and assigned responsibility for transforming the operational foundation of the entire Pacific Fleet. Admiral Mitchell approached as Isabella prepared to leave the communication center. Admiral Rodriguez, I suppose I should get used to saying that. There's one more piece of information you should know. General Harrison has requested early retirement rather than face investigation into his interference with operational effectiveness during a national security crisis. Isabella felt a complex mixture of emotions regarding Harrison's departure. His opposition had nearly derailed her career, but it had also forced her to develop and prove her methods under the most challenging possible conditions. Admiral Mitchell. General Harrison served his country for many years. His resistance to change reflected institutional culture rather than personal malice. I hope his retirement is peaceful. Mitchell smiled approvingly. Admiral, that's exactly the kind of leadership perspective that will serve you well in your new role. 6 months later, Rear Admiral Isabella Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the USS Enterprise, flagship of the Pacific Fleet, watching the largest multinational naval exercise in history unfold, according to coordination protocols that had become the new standard for Allied operations. 64 vessels from 15 nations moved in perfect harmony, their actions coordinated by AI, systems that processed tactical decisions faster than any human commander could match. The transformation had been remarkable. What began as resistance to innovation had evolved into enthusiastic adoption as the effectiveness of integrated coordination became undeniable. Allied navies that had initially questioned Isabella's methods now competed to implement them most effectively. Admiral Walsh joined Isabella on the bridge, studying the tactical displays showing unprecedented coordination across vast distances. Admiral Rodriguez, your coordination protocols have fundamentally changed how we think about naval warfare. The Chinese haven't attempted another major provocation since the October engagement. Isabella nodded, understanding that successful Deterrence was often invisible. Admiral, the coordination system works because it reflects the reality of modern threats, rather than the comfort of traditional responses. As long as we continue adapting faster than our adversaries, we maintain strategic advantage. Any regrets about the path that brought you here? Isabella considered the question carefully. Admiral, every challenge I faced taught me something essential about leadership and innovation. General Harrison's opposition forced me to develop methods that were more robust than anything I could have created without that pressure. As the exercise continued, Isabella watched young officers from multiple nations learning coordination techniques that would define their entire careers. Among them, she noticed Lieutenant Commander Maria Santos, a promising strategist whose innovative ideas were being enthusiastically received by senior commanders. Isabella approached Santos during a brief break in operations. "Commander, your suggestions for improving cyber coordination integration are impressive. Have you considered advanced strategic planning as a career path?" Santos' face lit up with enthusiasm. "Admiral, I'd be honored to contribute to the development of coordination protocols. Your work has inspired an entire generation of naval officers." Isabella smiled, remembering her own excitement when senior officers had first recognized her potential. "Commander, submit your ideas through formal channels. The Navy needs officers who can think beyond traditional limitations." As Isabella returned to her duties, she reflected on the remarkable journey that had brought her from dismissed junior officer to fleet commander. The path had been challenging, sometimes seemingly impossible, but each obstacle had ultimately strengthened her resolve and improved her capabilities. Standing on the bridge of the Pacific Fleet flagship, watching Allied nations coordinate with unprecedented efficiency, Rear Admiral Isabella Rodriguez understood that the most important victories weren't won through individual achievement, but through persistent innovation that made everyone more effective. The general who said she'd never make Admiral had been completely wrong, not because Isabella had proven him wrong through personal success, but because she had transformed the entire definition of what effective naval leadership could accomplish. The Pacific was safer, the alliance was stronger, and the future belonged to those willing to embrace its challenges rather than retreat into comfortable traditions. Admiral Isabella Rodriguez had proven that the most powerful response to those who say never is simply to build a better tomorrow. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.